Hello, and welcome to my talk, A Devil Makes History. This is a classic post-mortem on Diablo II, and I'm David Breivik. So, a little bit about who I am. I've been in the video game industry since 1991, and I was president of Blizzard North for about 10 years, and the creator of Diablo and Diablo II. I was the chief visionary officer of Flagship Studios, where I was the creator of Hellgate London. I was the CEO of Gazillion Entertainment, where I was the creator of Marvel Heroes. And I am currently the president of Greybeard Games and the creator of It Lurks Below, as well as the president of Skystone Games, an indie dev publisher. So we're here today to talk about Diablo II. This is the 20th anniversary, or it just passed this year. It was released on June 29th, 2000. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about that. But what great story does not start with a little history? So we're going to go back to 1993 when two brothers, Max and Eric Schaefer, and myself started a development company called Condor. And we had met a few years previously at a clip art company where they had not done great business and were going to switch from clip art to video games, and hired me to be the programmer to make a game on the Atari Lynx. But that didn't work out, and I left, and I was working as a programmer at a company called Iguana Entertainment, where we made a bunch of different games, including Arrow the Acrobat, and as well as things like Pirates of the Dark Water and a whole bunch of other stuff, mainly known for NBA Jam. And I left and created this development company with these two brothers that I had met, artists that I had met and created Condor. And with the connections that we had in the industry after being in it for a few years, we were able to get some work for hire. And this was a game called Justice League Task Force, where this was not kind of our own original game. A company called Sunsoft funded us to make this game for them and wanted us to make this kind of fighting game with the Justice League. So this was with Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, Flash, etc. And we were doing the game on the Sega Genesis, and we had been doing this game for a while, and this was back before E3 even existed, and we would do trade shows at the Consumer Electronics Show. The way that we would show off video games for the upcoming season or upcoming year and get buyers interested into product was showing them off at these trade shows like the Consumer Electronics Show. And Consumer Electronics Show was a lot of things, not just video games. We would be next to the car stereos and refrigerators and things like that. And there was our little video game section nestled among them. And we'd been working on this game for several years and had kind of created a company and hired some people to do the artwork and music and everything like that. And development was going really well. And we show up at this Consumer Electronics Show, and lo and behold, there's a second version of this game being developed by a different company on the Super Nintendo. And we didn't know that this game was being developed at all. We didn't realize that there was a second version. And so it was kind of really strange for us to show up and see that that there was in complete secrecy a second version of this game. We had never talked to them or anything. And what was even stranger is that the games looked very similar. And we had never talked, we had never shared information or resources or moves, and they played very similar and they looked very similar. And it was just a very strange situation to be in, that we had both made kind of the same game from a different perspective without knowledge of each other. And so we kind of get to know them. They were this developer called Silicon and Synapse, and we got to talking, and they said, well, we're making PC games, and so we're showing off our first PC game. Did we want to come and take a look? and they had rented a little booth right by, kind of like a little meeting room off in the meeting section of a giant hall, and were showing off their first glimpses at PC games. And we loved PC games at the time. My dream was to make PC games. This is what I had loved to do since the very beginning. I loved making games anyway, but the PC games were what I was, the most in love with. So I was really excited about the opportunity to talk to them about making PC games and how to enter that part of the industry, because I had no previous experience with that. And so we went and talked, and they said, oh, by the way, we've just changed our name from Silicon and Synapse to Blizzard Entertainment, and that game that they were showing off was Warcraft 1. Now, this game was really cool, and I was really excited by this product. I thought that it looked fabulous, and real-time strategy was just barely born. This was maybe the second real-time strategy game ever, and so I thought this was going to be a big hit. I was really excited about it. Not only myself, but other people that we had brought to Consumer Electronics Show went and looked at the product as well. And we all got very excited about what was happening and where it was going. And so we volunteered, hey, if you guys need some help beta testing the product, we'd be super happy to provide feedback and whatnot. And so we kind of exchanged information and kept in contact. And kind of time went by, and they reached out, and we got to talking more and more, and we started saying, hey, look, what we really want to do is we want to make PC games. And they said, well, after we finish Warcraft 1, why don't you come out and we'll pitch whatever idea you want, and see if there's kind of a fit, because we're looking for more product as well. We're making Warcraft 1, we're really busy doing that, but afterwards, let's talk. So we decided to put our thoughts to paper. We had a kind of design document, and even before that, we had already kind of like put this together because we had shopped it around. We had a design idea for a game called Diablo. And this game was kind of paid homage to my favorite genre, not only now, but at the time, which was rogue-like games. And this is mainly from when I was in college. I was kind of exposed to these games like Rogue, where the term rogue-like comes from, as well as other ones, NetHack and Moria, Moria, Angband, etc. There were a bunch of them that I really loved and enjoyed a lot and played thousands of hours of. As well as I had been thinking about making a Diablo game for a long time. Since high school, I had been thinking about making this product that was going to be an RPG. I knew I wanted to make RPGs. I knew I wanted it to be on the PC, and that kept evolving. But really, afterwards, and when we were creating Condor, we kind of solidified these ideas on what our version of an RPG would be like, which was very different than the other RPGs at the time. We went around, we pitched this at Consumer Electronics Show and other trade shows, where we were pitching company after company with this little design document that we had kind of created, and we would hand out at these things at the different trade shows. And we got rejected over and over and over again. Diablo got rejected probably 20 plus times. We would be able to finally talk to somebody in charge somewhere, and it wouldn't work out. And the thing that we kept hearing was that RPGs were dead. It was a dead genre, that nobody was going to buy products like RPGs anymore. They were failing left and right. That market was saturated, and sales had been plummeting, and so nobody was willing to risk funding a new RPG because they thought that there was no way that we would recoup their sales. However, Blizzard seemed very excited by this product, and so we took all of our information, got some feedback, and kind of talked about what this game could be. And we wrote it all up in this design document, which you can actually download at my website at Graybeard Games. So if you are interested in seeing the original design document for Diablo, it is there, and you can download the PDF. So it was, first off, Diablo was turn-based. It was not a real-time game. It was single-player. None of this obviously turned out to be true. It was DOS instead of Windows. This was before Windows 95. This was in 1994, I believe, is when we started pitching. 1993 is when we started pitching, and 1994 is when we really put it on. And then this was right around that time. And then it had expansion packs, sort of like Magic the Gathering. So it's kind of like DLC or other things that you can consider, where you would buy these packs of items. And so this was kind of way ahead of its time. It was also permadeath and many other kind of strange things about where we originally thought that the game would go. And a lot of this, again, was based on kind of my experience in playing kind of roguelike games and what we had been kind of, what were the tenets of those kind of products. And so we came up and we pitched. They came up from Southern California to Northern California, where we were located, which is about maybe like 200 kilometers away. And we, no, it's even further than that. It's like 500 kilometers. And so they came up and we pitched it. They loved it. And we signed a contract to create Diablo. Diablo, by the way, this is San Francisco, where I live. You can see there's a mountain right outside of San Francisco called Mount Diablo, and that is where the name comes from, as a little point of trivia. I used to live in high school. I used to live kind of at the base of the mountain. Once I found out what the mountain meant, I meant the devil in Spanish. I didn't know any Spanish when we moved here when I was in high school. And once I found out what the name meant, then I was like, oh, someday I'm going to make a game that is going to be the name. And actually, the name for Diablo was controversial, even during development of the product. At one point, we had talked about maybe going out and getting the license for the name Rogue and making a kind of like Rogue 2 would be the name of this product, or even just like rebranding it as Rogue. And we had talked about seriously doing that for a little while, though I was very adamant about naming it Diablo. Others weren't so sure. But in the end, we stuck with Diablo, and the name, I think, was the right choice. So during development, we changed the game from turn-based to real-time, and I've told this story before, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. The turn-based that we had was kind of a complicated turn-based. It wasn't my turn, your turn. It was kind of turn was broken down to basically, you can call them like turn points or something like that. You can think of it like that, where it was, it might take 1.4 turns to move diagonally and one turn to move, in any of the orthogonal directions, or like a half a turn to take a swing with your sword or something like that. So the turn order was kind of flexible. But we wanted to, they came to us, Blizzard Entertainment, at the time we were still Condor, and said, hey, we propose we change this, just like we were changing our strategy games to real-time. We think that changing this game to real-time would be a big difference. And we were opposed to this change, but in the end, we had a vote, and or at least I was opposed to it, and then we had a vote, and the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of changing the game to real-time. And I can kind of, so we gathered together in the kitchen, we voted, I was outvoted, we sent everybody home, this was like on a Friday, and said, okay, we're going to go take the weekend, we're going to see what this is like. I'm going to go away, I'm going to work on it, and see what happens. And so I sat down on a Friday, we sent everybody home, and I started working on it, and I coded up the change, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. I got all the code working, and they click on the screen and you can move, and at the time it was kind of like this turn-based XCOM style game or whatever, and I clicked on it, and the character went over and smacked a skeleton apart with its club, and it was amazing. It was like God spoke, the heavens, the clouds parted, a beam of sun came out through the window and shone on me. Oh, it was magical. This amazing, I clicked on it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is the most amazing feeling ever. And I knew right there, right then, that this was the perfect change for this game. And really, that was kind of the moment that that the kind of Diablo-style ARPGs were born. Was this moment that I clicked on the thing, walked over, and burst apart this skeleton. Slightly after this, we changed to Blizzard North when they contacted us. Blizzard Entertainment contacted us and said that they wanted to acquire us and make us, part of the family, which was great because we were really bad businessmen, and it was we were running out of money, and we had signed a bad contract for Diablo and all sorts of stuff. We were also working on a product for 3DO, and at the time, 3DO was very nervous that we were going to be working that we were going to get bought by Blizzard Entertainment because we were working on one of their most important titles. So they started to have a bidding war between Blizzard Entertainment and 3DO, and actually in the end 3DO actually offered us almost twice as much money to be acquired by them, but we decided to go with Blizzard Entertainment because we felt like the studios aligned better, that they understood games better than 3DO did, and that the people there, we got along, we had a better connection with them, and that was more important than the money. And we felt like ultimately it was going to be better for the game and better for the studio if we went to Blizzard. So we changed our name to Blizzard North, and we became part of that family, and it was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. Towards the end of development, they came up with this idea down south where they contacted me and said, hey, we've got this idea where we believe that we should come up with a way that you can play the game over the internet. So we're going to make this service called battle.net, and you can just click on right from the game, you can rather than having to have a separate service or go through some other kind of third-party thing, you can just click on a menu option right in the game and go in and play multiplayer over the internet. This was kind of unheard of at the time. A lot of games had some LAN support and things like that, but kind of internet gaming was very, very young. And there were oftentimes other services like Total Entertainment Network 10 and things like that you would hook up to them. You could play Doom and stuff over the internet by hooking up through these services, and kind of you would make these accounts on them and make some friends and kind of do it that way. But nobody had really made it so that you could actually hook up and have this built into a product. So this is a revolutionary idea. And they had come to us with like 6 months left in the project. So one of the biggest problems, though, is that we didn't know what we were doing in multiplayer. And I had never made a multiplayer game before. And this was actually my very first PC game that I had ever made as well. So this was, a big step. I didn't know what I was doing. And so luckily, some of the programmers from down south came up and worked with us the last 4 or 5 months of the product and of making Diablo, and moved up to the Bay Area and worked on making the game multiplayer, because it was just magic how that what the mysteries of multiplayer. But we didn't have time really to do any kind of other multiplayer than peer-to-peer. And that, in the end, was a kind of a terrible result. So the game released. This was Diablo. This was, and things were great. It was a big hit. People really loved the game, and the play through the internet and Battle.net was a really big hit. However, it was peer-to-peer, and that meant that there was this rampant cheating. And one of the things that we had not thought of was that you could just upload these cheats and everybody could download them. So cheating was everywhere. And also the grind to at the end of Diablo was pretty severe, and we were kind of burnt out on making Diablo. It was 3 or 4 months of really working every day, and we were trying to make Thanksgiving. And Diablo was released on the last day of 1996. We literally went gold, I think like the day after Christmas or 2 days after Christmas, something like that. And I was working right through Christmas and right through the holidays. Originally, the intent was for Diablo I to come out right before Thanksgiving is ideal, so that it's on the store shelves for Christmas. And so here we are. We've missed our Christmas deadline, and we've really been crunching to try and get the product finished and get it on store shelves. And it came out the last day of 1996. My wife was pregnant at the time. My daughter was born several days later after the game was released. And so I was really kind of burnt out. Not just me, but other people in the company were all kind of burnt out. And so we didn't want to think about making Diablo or Diablo II or anything like that for a couple months. And so we kind of recovered. I took a little bit of time off. I had a baby, and so we decided, well, let's start thinking about what we're going to do next after we started like supporting it and patching it and things like that. What are we gonna do? And so we didn't want to go back to Diablo. We had kind of enough of Diablo, and we really wanted to focus on doing something else. And so we started throwing some other ideas around about what we might want to do. And as we were doing that, we were realizing that, really what we want to do is we want to get back to Diablo. There are a bunch of things that we did with Diablo that, aren't sitting right with me right now. And that, I think that we can make it better than we did last time. And mainly this had to do with the cheating. The fact that it was peer-to-peer and the cheating was rampant. It was like, God, we really want to make kind of a legitimate online version of Diablo where there's a real economy and you can trade items and it means something. And that was really one of the biggest motivations in seeing kind of how people really loved Diablo, but were, very critical, and rightfully so, of the way that things have been going with the online part of the game. And there was nothing that we could do about it because the entire model was peer-to-peer. There was no way that we could prevent the cheating. Peer-to-peer means that we've got everybody's in charge of their own computer and what they're doing, and so they can make decisions however they want. So we were like, started thinking about this. Maybe we should make a Diablo II, and oh yeah, we've got some other ideas that we could do. So we said, hey, in the end, it took us about 3 or 4 months to get there, but we said, I think that is the direction we're going to go. We are going to make a second version of this product. So we kind of started to think about the way that we were going to do this. And one of the things that really helps kind of understand how Blizzard North worked is a little bit of kind of background on the way that we worked. We had several different philosophies at Blizzard North, and one of them was that everybody contributes, and what that means is that everybody has their ideas that can go into the game. If you are there was one person at the entire company in Blizzard North that had the title designer, and everybody else was a designer in the game. So if you're a programmer, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you're support staff, HR, etc., no matter who it was, we were all gamers. So this was very different than the way that video games companies worked back then. A lot of times video game companies, publishers and whatnot, were filled with businessmen that really didn't play games. But everybody at Blizzard North was a gaming fanatic. So because of that, everybody could contribute. Everybody was really into games, played games, etc., knew games, talked about games, was passionate about games. And because of that, everybody could contribute. They contributed design ideas. They contributed in many different ways. And people would come up with their own concepts and run them by us, and we would talk about them and work them out. So it was everybody's design work that contributed to Blizzard North. And this is one of the reasons that I think that Blizzard North succeeded, was that we had so much contribution, not just from one person or a small group of people, but from a large group of people that were passionate about games. The second philosophy that we had was make it playable. And what we mean by this is that the game was up and running all the time. And so you could at any time play the game. And this worked with Diablo 1 and was with Diablo 2. There were only a couple weeks where we took some time and got kind of the initial levels working and things like that. And even then, it was still working. And we would get bugs out right away, and we would try and make the game playable moment to moment. Anytime, anywhere, any place, this was the focus. You could, at any night, go play the game, or any day, any time, go play the game and give it a try and get feedback and work on your ideas and see how it was working. So it was in a playable state a large portion of the time, let's say 90% of the time. And I think this really helps. It really helps to play your game, and it really helps to kind of iterate on it and make it better and better. And so that came down to this focus on the moment to moment, making sure that that micro segment of the game is excellent. And this, for Diablo and Diablo 2, was, what does that combat feel like? How does it feel to move around the screen and fight the monsters in any way, whether or not it's with melee or whether it's ranged or whatever it was? Like, we were constantly iterating on this, and constantly iterating on the combat and on the and on that kind of moment-to-moment experience really made it great over the years. And that kind of gets me to the next thing, which is nothing is sacred or done. So because of the iteration, because of this process, because of having it running at all times, we're able to kind of iterate on it over and over and make small changes here and there, come up with new ideas on how to do things to make it better over a long period of time. And so the time and part of the game that we worked on the most was the most important part of the game. And so that, because that was up and running early, because we constantly played it, because we were able to kind of constantly iterate on it, and nothing was sacred, any idea could be killed or reworked or whatever, then that part of the game was ultra polished by the time that the game came out. And that was incredibly important for that to feel and be great and be worked on for the entire length of the project. So one of the things that we decided when we're going to do and make this game great, what are we going to do when we're going to do this sequel? There's all sorts of different ways we can go. But at its core, we wanted to make sure that the game was the way that what was the essence of Diablo. What was that core that we wanted to keep when we were making Diablo II? And one of the things that was very popular with RPGs at the time, such as here with Baldur's Gate and Ultima, is that these games were kind of story-based games. And so you would go through an adventure, you would get kind of led along the way, and your experience your experience was similar to somebody else's experience. They would go through the same parts of the story, and they would go through it in a way that was kind of a linear fashion. And these are great games, but that wasn't really what Diablo was at its core. One of the things that is really paramount to the way that Diablo works is keeping that core of what it is, and that is the random generation that comes back from its roots as a roguelike game, retaining the randomly generated levels, the monsters, the treasure, and everything like that. Not just because it allows for the replay potential. I mean, that being able to play the game over and over again wasn't really it is part of the core, but what is beyond that core is making each player's game their own. And by that, I mean, nobody in the world would have the exact same experience that you had. They would not have the same items. They would not have the same build as you, the same way that you went through the game. The way that you kind of chose your skills, or the path that you took, was going to be different. There were going to be quests that you did that other people didn't do. There were going to be experiences, a different way that you went about it. There would be some commonality. There would be some things that kind of ground you, but the items that you had, the things that you found, the order that you fought the monsters in would be different each time. And this was very different than other RPGs at the time. Many RPGs, it was these same monsters, this same kind of item would drop from this particular monster after this particular encounter that happened after this particular thing. It was a very linear kind of experience. We would get the same results. And so the way that I played the game, the way that you played the game, was a very similar experience. But Diablo at its core is about making an experience that nobody else will have ever again. Nobody will have the exact same experience as you because of all the randomness. You're telling your own story. And we wanted to make sure that that core tenet was part of Diablo and Diablo II, and we believe strongly in keeping that intact. So one of the things that we wanted to do is make the game bigger and better. So it wasn't just that Diablo II, we want to fix the multiplayer things and but we also left a lot on the table of things that we wanted to do in the game. There were a lot of ideas that we had with Diablo and a lot of feedback that we received after launch, such as slow walking through town and things like that. Oh my God, the walk out to the witch is a nightmare. Why can't we run? Oh yeah, we should put running in the game. Things like that were important to making the game feel great. But we also wanted to make it kind of bigger and better. We figured, hey, if we could kind of double the size of the development team from about 20 people to about 40 people, plus the increase in efficiency of tools and having written the game before and things like that, we believe that we can make the game maybe at least twice as large, maybe 3 times as large as Diablo 1. We also wanted a bunch of other aspects to it. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make this 5 character classes instead of 3 character classes. We're going to do a whole new set of character classes. And a lot of these character classes were kind of rooted in the foundations of Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of the people there, including myself, started playing Dungeons and Dragons as a preteen, and I fell in love with the world, though for me it wasn't necessarily about storytelling. I know that can be a big part of Dungeons and Dragons. It was always about the loot. I wanted the cool swords and the cool items, as it's no surprise. Diablo in that way really carries on kind of a D&D type style, but where the focus is on items. And so we wanted to kind of go back to the roots. Let's get character classes that were kind of similar to the things that are kind of staples to Dungeons and Dragons. And so we went with a Necromancer. Amazon was kind of like an archer. We wanted to do, we didn't know which way to go with the Amazon. Should we go archer? Should we go spear? And so in the end, we kind of came up with this new class, but it was still kind of foundationally built on like a archer or ranger style class, paladin and sorceress and barbarian. And these were all kind of like, we decided that these were common enough names, people understood the character classes, that we would move forward with these 5 classes. We think that we can do it all. So during this time, we had started playing some Everquest. This came out in 1999. But even before that, there is a kind of advent of 3D graphics. Cards were kind of becoming a thing. Video cards, 3D FX cards, and things like that that were kind of accelerators to make polygons on the screen. And this was kind of cutting-edge graphics. This was cutting-edge graphics in 1991. This picture of a screenshot of Everquest, where the characters were kind of broken down into low polygon, very low polygon. You could only render a few polygons. You can see this giant stretched polygon on the ground there. You can only render a bit, but these were kind of in their infancies, and many people were going 3D. And so we had this big decision to make: would we go 3D or not to go 3D? And so the thing is, the way that we made a lot of the models is that for not only Diablo 1 but for Diablo 2 is that they were all rendered in 3D Studio Max. We'd make these 3D models, and we would render them to a picture, and then we would use a tool to cut out the sprite and put it in the game. And so all of the game was modeled in 3D already. All of the artists had tons of 3D experience from Diablo 1, and so would we go full 3D? And it was a big debate because we didn't think that the game could not only handle the amount of polygons that we would need on the screen. We also thought that we could create a lot higher detail on the graphics if we went with sprites instead of 3D models. 3D models were kind of jaggy and ugly, and there were very low textures, very small textures, and very low polygon counts. We thought ultimately the game will just look better if it could use sprites. And there were things that we could do. We could change it so that in Diablo 1, we're going to do it better. We're going to do more in Diablo 2. And we're going to have 16 directions instead of 8 directions. And we're going to have higher res instead of I don't remember exactly what the resolution in Diablo 1 was, but let's say 640 by 480, and we're going to do 800 by 600. And we had considered making it 24-bit color instead of 8-bit color. In the end, we ended up going 8-bit, but with this kind of adaptive palette technology, which worked out really well. And so we said, in the end, we don't believe that the game can look as good. We can make it look much better and much more high res if we don't go with real-time polygon, but instead make a kind of high res sprites and give them kind of a more fluid motion and a higher detail. We're also going to do something that was important, I think, to Diablo 2. One of the big increases, one of the big steps up that we did from Diablo 1 is that Diablo 1 had only kind of 3 looks for your character armor. You had kind of a light, a medium, and a heavy. And with this one, each one would have a component system. So your legs could look different than your chest, could look different than your helmet, and things like that. There were only kind of 3 base looks for Diablo 1, whereas with Diablo 2, each little bit of you could change graphically, and that was going to be a huge upgrade in the way that the game looked in the end. So with this component system, with all of these, they increased the double number of directions and compression and the higher res graphics in terms of an 800 by 600 resolution. We thought that we could deliver an experience that was much better than what other 3D polygon games looked like at the time. However, this was kind of concerning to us because so many games were at the time kind of this flat-looking 3D, non-3D world. As you can see, this was the way that the game looked, is that you walked around and everything was very static. The world was kind of like in normal looking way that you looked around. Nothing was dynamic. Nothing gave you kind of this depth and flavor. And so one idea I came up with during development was this idea I was nicknamed perspective mode. And this was kind of late in development. It was probably maybe a year left in the game, maybe a little bit longer than that, year and a half left in the game. And I came up with this idea, hey, what if we take our little static world, which looked like this, and how as you walk around, you can see that, everything stays in place. We're drawing this just like a grid where the world is kind of a set of diamonds that you kind of like draw the ground and then draw the walls and the sprites and all of their things, and it is layered in this way. What if we took this and we mapped them to 3D polygons? And so this was, the texture of the ground was going to be a texture, that we would map that to a polygon. So the world would become this, and we could, project this into 3D space and have the graphics cards use this, use the textures, the 2D sprites that we have, and kind of stretch them onto these polygons. And so this worked really well, and the result kind of speaks for itself. As you move around, you can see, you can see the kind of walls slide against the background and make this kind of faux 3D perspective. And so this was revolutionary. This is something that we had, that I thought really gave the game a dynamic kind of feel that we had never had before, and changed the way that the game looked and felt. It pushed it beyond this kind of like, it was like this 2D kind of game into almost like a 2.5 3D hybrid. And I thought it made all of the difference in the world. As you can see, you can move around, and it made the whole screen more dynamic and the whole world more dynamic. So that was a big win for us. One of the next changes that we made was that Diablo was kind of notorious for these terrible load screens. Back then, disk drives were very low, very slow, and the memory was very low, and so we had to load these load screens between levels. And back in the mid 90s or to late 90s, things like CD-ROMs and stuff, loading this information off these devices was very, very slow, and so it would take, could take seconds, like 10 seconds or something like that, to go travel between levels in Diablo 1. So how can we do that better? How can we take what we had in Diablo 1 and plus it here, and make it better? So the way that I thought about, maybe we could dynamically stream the world as we walked around. And so this would instead break the world up into these little subsections, and we would load kind of as we go. We would load smaller sections of the world instead of kind of loading one level at a time and changing levels. And this allowed us to create large areas where we could stream these things in. And this really hadn't been done very often in games at the time. There were some games that were doing this, but a lot of games still had this kind of technology where you load one level at a time. Still, games do this today. Some are streaming, some are not. And this was really kind of a big inspiration for the World of Warcraft. And one of the things that we did with that, which was changing it from Everquest kind of loading each zone to having kind of a seamless world. We want to employ the same philosophies. And so streaming world, I thought, made a huge difference, making it a more immersive experience. Nothing broke up the immersion like having this level that you loaded between, having these load screens between the levels. It took you out of the world, and I wanted a situation where it felt like you were more a part of a place, and you kept that constantly. One of the other changes that we made was client-server multiplayer. And this was to prevent hacking. Like I had said earlier, when we originally made Diablo 1, it was with these peer-to-peer model. And then what that means is every computer, every person is in charge of what is happening with them. Hey, I killed this monster. Hey, this item dropped. But that was obviously very hackable when your computer is making these decisions. And so people uploaded these cheats, everybody downloaded them, everybody was running them, and they could cheat and do whatever they wanted. And so the multiplayer versions of it were completely corrupt, versus client server, where the server is making all of the decisions. The clients hook up to it, but they don't make any decisions, and the server makes all the decisions and sends the information to the client. And this made all the difference in the world. There was still cheating because there were loopholes in the code and whatnot, but eventually it became a very stable foundation for making a very cheat-proof environment, or largely cheat-proof environment. One of the things that I was kind of known for at the time is this joke that we had for shower ideas. Oftentimes I would come into the office and I would talk about, I had this idea in the shower this morning. And so people would make fun of, oftentimes when I would say this would mean that somebody was going to have a lot of work. So we... how are we going to have the, how are we going to, who's going to have a bunch of work once I come in with these shower ideas? But, and the shower ideas were often kind of like all sorts of things. Like I had an idea in the shower this morning was the perspective mode. I had an idea in the shower this morning was the smooth load, smooth leveling rather than having a level loading. And so having level streaming. And then one day I walked in and I said, I've been playing a lot of this game called Master of Orion, one of my favorite games of all time. And I said, one of the things that we wanted to change about it was like, how are we going to make it so that the classes are a little bit more rigid than they were in Diablo 1? One of the problems with Diablo 1 is that people get in trouble and they could end up making character classes that weren't very good. Their experience was bad because there was so much freedom to make almost any kind of character class that you want, that they would end up making these bad decisions and have a really rough time with the game. And so we wanted to kind of like narrow that down this time. And I was like playing these games and saying, well, it would be really cool if they could kind of choose their path in a way that was different than everybody else, keeping to that core tenet of Diablo, making sure that people are making their own experience. But one of the great things about these strategy games is that they had these tech trees. And so you could say, I want to make, this is the direction that I want to go with my, the technology that I want to research, and these are the new kind of things that I want to make. And I love this in Master of Orion and Civilization and things like that, where you could like decide which direction you're going, and that would have an influence on the game and what technologies were available, what kind of ships you could make, or what kind of units you could build, or whatever it was. And I love these kind of decisions that you were making. So what if we took that and we kind of combined it with skills? And I threw this idea out. Let's come up with these skill trees where you could choose which skills you're taking, and they could modify existing skills or improve, or create new skills or improve existing skills. And so, but it would be this tree-like structure where you could choose these things. And this was kind of the birth of skill trees, which are kind of throughout all sorts of games these days. This was a really great idea. However, this meant this was a tremendous amount of work. We had to redo a lot of things. This was going to set us back, but this was bigger and better in an obvious way that I thought that everybody thought that this was a really cool idea. And we kind of started on it, and a lot of people ran with this. A lot of people came together to kind of make this a reality, and it was great. In the end, I think it was one of our kind of pillar ideas that really made the game stand out. So late in the process, we had been working on doing all sorts of things, making the Horadric Cube. But one of the games I had been playing at the time, like I had said, was Everquest. And one of the things I loved about it was all the crafting that came out of Everquest. And it made a lot of sense. When you killed a bat wing would drop and things like that. One of the things, the jokes about Diablo and other things is, hey, that bat just dropped a halberd. Where was, I guess that was in the bat's pocket. Why is this giant piece, breastplate just dropped off this fallen? Why was this fallen carrying all these items? And so we wanted to kind of make a more realistic game. And so we came up with this idea of we could have all these body parts and we could kind of put them together in this crafting mechanic to make different items and stuff like that, do this kind of crafting similar to other MMOs and stuff at the time. Other games had kind of a crafting system, and this would be all these body parts, and we could drop, bones and hearts and eyeballs and all sorts of stuff to kind of like you would get off of these monsters that you could use to make the game, make all sorts of cool stuff. and come up with this kind of crafting system using a cube that we called the Horadric Cube. And so we had worked on this system for a while, and the people down south hadn't played the game in a little bit, and they called up after playing and said, we've been playing lately, it's going really well, we really like what we see, things are great, but these body parts, they're really gross. Like I open up my inventory, my whole entire inventory is filled with guts and eyeballs and hearts and all of this kind of stuff. It's like this gore fest in my inventory. I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of true. And so we debated it for a while. And in the end, we decided that it was too over the top. We wanted people to be excited about items and not have this kind of like, you're opening up, somebody's guts or something every time you're opening up your inventory. It was just like, there was just too much gore in the inventory every time you opened up the inventory. So, we decided, hey, what's going to be best here is that we remove these. This was not a popular decision. This is a big debate. People were really upset. They loved the body parts in the office. And there was a little protest that went on. And so we removed them, and people were really upset. And kind of to show their solidarity, a lot of people ended up putting notes, little posters of protest posters on their office doors and outside their cubicles and things like that, bringing the body parts back. The people were really upset. They wanted the body parts to be a part of the game, and there was kind of like outrage for months that people still actually kind of that were on the team still are a little upset that we took them out. But in the end, I think it was the right decision. It was just too bloody and too gory, and really kind of like pushed the game over the top and almost made it kind of comical because there was too much gore. And we wanted to, it took away from detracted from the kind of focus of the game. Rather than being on blood and guts and everything like that in your inventory, it should be more about items and finding things, and ultimately I think it was the right decision. But it was funny to walk around the office and have all of these people with their Bring the Body Parts protest posters on their doors. So all of these great decisions, all of these things led to the final grind. Because we had decided to make more classes, more levels, streaming worlds, all of these kind of decisions, client server, all of these things. What we thought was going to be a 2 to ish year project turned out to not be that. We had just kept designing more and more and more and more, and guess what? It kept taking longer and longer and longer and longer. So we got a little bit nervous. We were trying to release the game for Christmas 1999, and so we around the springtime, late springtime, we started crunching, and we started working hard. We were behind. We had to we were going to crunch. We were going to get this thing done, have it ready for Christmas. Nobody wanted this. Everybody, but this was just kind of the way things were back then. It's not a good decision. I don't recommend it. It cost me dearly, costs everybody dearly, but it was what it was, and we crunched. And so I started crunching in about May or so, April, May, somewhere right in that time frame. And by crunching, I meant I worked every single day. I didn't take a day off. And most days I probably worked upwards of 14 to 16 hours. And I would say I probably averaged 12-hour days throughout the process of the crunch. And so I worked literally every day. I didn't take any days off. And we kept working and working and working. Eventually, I ended up, as we were kind of like grinding, and it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people. Everybody was working on the weekends. Everybody was working on every day. There were some people taking some time off. I recommended some people take some time off. But most of the time, we would work every day. We would order meals. We would give people sleeping bags and toothbrushes. And people were kind of just like, some days sleeping at the office we were just working, and this was a terrible, terrible grind at the end of this project. And so we were working, and kind of like summer became fall, and it was pretty obvious that we were not going to make it. Though I still believe that we could, as late as even October. I believe that we could make the end of the year, and we could make Christmas, and we just needed to grind a little harder, and we could have this. Blizzard South called up and said, we don't think this is going to make it, and it's okay, but you're not going to make it, so let's continue, but we still believed that we could. We kept grinding. I kept working, though the grind became a little bit more relaxed after this. I still was working. Myself and others were still working every day. And eventually I ended up taking about 3 days off through the entire process of this crunch, which lasted up until kind of the Gold Master, which was in June the following year. So it was a little bit over a year that I crunched. I took 3 days off, and like I said, was just an incredible grind on myself and my relationships and life and my soul. But in the end, we finished the game, and it came out great, but it was a terrible, terrible grind. Through this grind, one of the things that we had to do, we had to come to terms with kind of reducing the scope of the game. Originally, the game was set to be, we had two kind of big ideas. One was BattleNet Town, and the other was that we were going to have 5 acts. And so around the time that Blizzard South contacted us, we decided to reduce the number of acts from 5 to 4. We just knew that that was not going to make it. So we cut that pretty early. And then, so we had to kind of reduce scope. So cutting a fifth of the game out was important, and skipping and getting right into that 4th act. And I mean, we cut out the 4th act of the thing. We kept the 5th act and cut out the 4th act to kind of reduce it, cutting it down, the total number of acts from 5 to 4, as well as making sure that the BattleNet Town, which is this idea where when you entered the game, you weren't going to go into a BattleNet chat. Instead, you would go into a shared town, and that you would always be in the game. Again, this was about immersion, making sure that you were always part of this world. You never left this world. And when you left the town, you would go into your own instance of the game with you and your party, but you were always in this world. You come back to town, and there'd be chat that you could do in town, but you could also visit NPCs and things like that. So at this time, we had to kind of like come to grips and come to reality with the scope was just too big. And so we ended up cutting out a fifth of the game, as well as cutting out this BattleNet Town. Then, as we were making the Gold Master, something happened. One of the things that we did is that we had a source control, and the source control that we used was this thing called Visual Source Safe. This was a great, in many ways, great source control product made by Microsoft. And simple to use, had kind of this like checkout system similar to a library where we'd check out code and check it back in, check out assets or whatever, and then you could kind of get latest, and everybody you'd be able to share your assets and share your code with everybody. This is a very common practice in development. And so we had been working on it, going along, things have been going well. But one of the things that SourceSafe was notorious for is that SourceSafe could become corrupted. And sure enough, that is exactly what happened. Several days before the Gold Master, our SourceSafe became completely corrupted. And by that I mean everything disappeared. The database wouldn't load up. You couldn't run SourceSafe anymore. And we were like, that really sucks. But luckily, we kind of like backed everything up, and so we can go to the backups. And so we went to the backups and realized that the backups had never actually worked. So we had no backups, we had no database, we had no history, we had no history on the code, we didn't have a lot of the assets. So we had to, one of the things is that everybody could get the latest code and stuff and put them on their machines. So we had different assets on different people's machines, and we had to like cobble the whole thing back together. And so some people had some of the code on their machines, some people had some of their assets on their machines, but some of the stuff was lost forever. Some of these assets, like all of these high definition models and textures and things like that, took a tremendous amount of space. So people would end up putting them in the source safe database and then deleting them off their drives. So a lot of the content for the history on a bunch of these old sprites and things like that, and all the models of the things like the player models or the monster models and things like that were lost forever. And as well as but we were able to kind of cobble it all back together in a it took us about a week for us to put it all back together and get the game running again. But this was a kind of an emergency dire situation and totally terrible thing to go through as we were trying to finish. There wasn't as much of a time pressure, though we did want to make the second quarter. We were able to kind of like get it back together but a lot of this history and a lot of the old stuff was lost forever. Then the game came out on June 29th, 2000, which is 20 years ago, slightly over 20 years ago now. And there I am signing the boxes. This is a release party. There I am with a couple of the different people that work there, including Matt Ullman and Karin C. She used to be Colenso is her last name, her maiden name, which, by the way, you can hear here's a couple pieces of trivia on the Fallen. You hear some of them. Colenso is one of the things that they shout, and that was Karin. Another is that Rakinishu's that was my sneeze. Was the Rakinishu. I'm a kind of loud sneezer, and Matt Ullman, his office has always been right near mine. And one day I guess had a really loud sneeze that sounded like Rakinishu, and that went into the game, and that is how Rakinishu was named. And then Rick Cease, that's Karin and Rick. They're married. And at the thing, and so here we are at designing at an EBX or something like that, a GameStop or some sort of thing. We were selling boxes. As you can see, actually on the shelf behind me, you can see The Sims had just come out, as well as there's Daikatana and Vampire the Masquerade, a few other games out there. They're classic games or whatever that were at the time. I didn't realize that The Sims and Diablo II had come out basically at the same time. It was funny. So after that, we moved on and made Diablo II expansion. Because we had kind of cut out some of the things that we wanted to do, we had overscoped it. Everything was going to be bigger and better and more. And we ran out of time. We had this horrible crunch, but there was still a lot that we wanted to add to the game. And we had cut out this entire act. And so we decided for our follow-up, we would make an expansion this time. This is something that they wanted for Diablo 1. We didn't end up making an expansion. A different company ended up making an expansion for Diablo 1 called Hellfire. But we were going to make an expansion for Diablo 2 and put in kind of that act that we cut out, but we had to kind of change it. But we could kind of set it in the same kind of place, but it was the story needed to change and things like that. But we knew where we wanted to take it. And so with the Lord of Destruction, we added 2 new character classes. We added rune words, and we added this missing act, as well as other things. And we thought that this really would kind of like boost the game and make the game kind of complete from where we kind of set out. This was it felt unfinished for us. Diablo 2 came out. We got good reviews. I wouldn't say rave reviews. One of the things that people didn't like about the game was the fact that it wasn't 3D. We got really big kind of a ding for that. There were all sorts of problems, networking problems in the client server. There was some cheating at the beginning and duping and things like that. And again, we felt like it didn't have kind of the darkest tone, very similar to the really dark tone of Diablo 1. This was a little bit lighter, and it was mainly because there was outdoor areas and things like that. It was more of a world kind of setting, and not just down in the deep, dark dungeon. But we felt like there was still stuff that we wanted to add to the game, rune words and this other act and other ideas we had that we just couldn't come to fruition in the time that we had done it. So we decided we were going to make an expansion. We were very excited about it. One of the things that we decided to do, Matt Ullman here, who's on the right with the conductor there, that decided that he really wanted to record the soundtrack with an actual orchestra, and so he spent the better part of the kind of crunch time at the end of Diablo II and the beginning of the expansion, working on writing out the sheet music for an orchestra and composing all of the music. And so this was a big gamble to like not be able to hear the music right away, or like be able to kind of iterate on it in the same kind of fashion that the Diablo II soundtrack, which was so successful, to like put all the eggs in this basket of we're going to go and do a live recording of all this music. And so, but we, will this work? And I believed in Ullman. I believed that it could happen. And so he flew to and did contracted with the Slovak Radio Symphony Orchestra, and they recorded the entire thing, and it came out beautifully. I think that the soundtrack to the Diablo II expansion worked amazing, and the music was fabulous, and the gamble paid off. Would it work or would it not? We still felt like we had time to recover if it didn't work, but it ended up working perfectly, and what a payoff to make this incredible soundtrack, not only for Diablo 2, but the Diablo 2 expansion turned out wonderfully. Lord of Destruction came out almost a year to the date after Diablo 2 came out, June 27th, 2001. And the game really changed forever. It was like a huge change, like I said, with rune words and this extra act and all of these kind of, the story and all of this stuff. This was a kind of a giant change for the game and the way that things happened. Then lastly, kind of as the last big update to Diablo 2 was the 110 patch. And this came out on October 28th, 2003. This was 3 and almost half years after Diablo 2 came out, and this added all sorts of things. There's a new rune words and kind of a new endgame. This was very different than the rune words became much more of an important aspect. There were a bunch of new rune words that were added, and it became much more of an important aspect to the game. You could purchase mana potions from the store, which weren't available. Mercenaries could be revived in town. Uber Diablo was created to deal with the Stone of Jordan problem. One of the things is that cheating was still kind of ramping, or duping was rampant, and people were kind of like trading for items using Stone of Jordan, this very popular item that could be used to kind of like dupe. People would dupe the Stone of Jordan, so the economy was filled with duped Stone of Jordans. And so like fixing the duping problems and fixing the once and for all by giving items unique IDs and all sorts of things, and getting these Stone of Jordans out of the economy by creating this Uber Diablo. Skill synergies, having this the skill tree have some skills in it affect the other skills. If you take this skill, it has an impact on another skill in the tree. That was taken with 110 patch. And there were many, many balance changes that were made. It was mainly done, a large portion of the project of this was coded and done and designed by Peter, who just one person. Though a lot of people contributed to it, there were still other people that did design work and testing and all sorts of things like that. A good chunk of the work was done by a single person, which was pretty amazing. So in the end, this really kind of brought Diablo 2 into kind of the modern era, and that's it became kind of the game that we know and love at this point. But this took literally 3.5 years for it to get to this point. And so I think that people finally remember Diablo 2 nowadays, but the fact that it took this long to get to it is pretty incredible. So Diablo 2 today is still very, very popular. There are people a vibrant modding community 20 years later. People making new mods like Median XL or Path of Diablo, which like radically changed the game. These things are incredible, new classes and skills and all sorts of stuff that they add to the game, new items and all sorts of things, new graphics. I mean, it's amazing the things that they do. As well as it's very vibrant on things like Twitch. The other day I went on to Twitch, and over 2,000 people were watching Diablo II, Lord of Destruction, Diablo II and the Lord of Destruction expansion. This is basically the way it's labeled on Twitch. 2,000 viewers at a morning on a random weekday. It's incredible that there's this many people watching a 20-year-old game. This is 20 years later. There's still a huge following, and there's a vibrant community that does speed runs and stuff like that. Here's Mr. Llama and Ryu. They do a bunch of speed running. There's just a really vibrant community that does modding as well as Twitch, and still Diablo today. Many people lend it a ton of support, and so the legacy continues, and we get new people playing all the time, and it's amazing to see how this worked, something that we worked so hard on. Myself, the team, many people have sacrificed and made a huge contribution to this product. We're so proud of the way that kind of evolved, and the way that it came about, and the end product that we worked so hard on for so many years. For it to be so beloved is just a wonderful experience, and we're very blessed to have that. People ask me whether I ever get sick about talking about Diablo, and the fact is that I don't. I love Diablo and Diablo II so much, and I'm so grateful that so many people have enjoyed the product. And still today, a lot of people say, "Oh, it's my favorite game," or it still gets tons of support in the community and things like that. It's wonderful to hear, and it's just such a gem and such a privilege to have worked on, and such an honor. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed it. You can contact me at David Breivik on Twitter. I also stream on Twitch. I stream game development and things like that on Greybeard Games. And I have a new product called It Lurks Below. It's available now on Steam, GOG, and Xbox and PC Game Pass. It's called It Lurks Below. It's kind of a Diablo-esque style game, kind of played from the side, and I did all of the work on it. I did some pixel art, as well as I did almost all the pixel art, the programming, the music, everything. And so it's kind of almost like a one-man project, and I probably did 95% of it, and made my own engine and things like that. So anyway, if you want to check it out, I'd appreciate it. So thank you so much for joining me, and now we'll go on to the QA session.